Hello and welcome to Soundance Festival in Berlin. My name is Emily May and I'm a dance writer and critic. So we've just seen the piece Aural Haptics and now's our chance to hear from the artists behind the performance. But before I kick off with some questions, I would like to hand over to them so that they can introduce themselves.
I'm Audrey Chen.
My name is Henrik Munkeby Nørstebø.
Yuko Kaseki, Megumi Eda.
Great, thank you so much for joining us. So I wanted to kick off with a question for Audrey, and starting at the very beginning about what the title Aural Haptics means and how this relates to the themes that you're exploring in this piece.
Well, I came up with the title actually when Jenny Hack had invited me for the festival, and then I was trying to figure out, okay, how am I going to write a text without actually having put together the piece yet, or having met the people that I'm going to be in the group with. I mean, I knew everybody somehow I've performed with Yuko before a few times, Megumi once. Henrik and I are a regular collaboration in a music duo. But I was trying to think of, you know, this always this kind of relationship between sound and movement is actually a tricky one for me. I mean, in terms of, for us, I think I move when I'm on stage, but I try not to think about how I look too much. And I end up moving a lot because every single movement in my face is a practical one. It's all very functional, but it's a lot of movement because it's very physical. And so this relationship of this physicality where you're actually really working to create a kind of sound, especially if it's if there's some athleticism involved, is somehow I wanted to always look for that kind of relationship with movement, with a dancer, with somebody who's working with movement specifically, but not working with movement to make a specific sound. So this was kind of an opportunity that I thought, okay, how do I think about this, about movement, about sound? And it kind of, for me, a little bit, these ideas were sort of reverberating, and I was thinking about this idea of how, you know, haptics is this sort of study of especially my son was studying prosthetics, like neuroprosthetics, and he had this sort of, he was explaining to me these ideas of how you have a phantom limb if your arm is cut off, and sometimes you still sense your hand, you still feel like something's there. And this idea also of you know, where you leave off, you kind of leave some kind of residue of yourself. Mm-hmm. And this is also, for me, like it's a physical sensation, but it's also an aural one. Mm-hmm. So how do we think about residual movement, residual sound, and they're all kind of like an echo. And in the text that I wrote, there's also a quote from this book that I read recently by Ocean Vuong. It's called On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous. It's a really beautiful novel. There's a quote from there that that he talks about, you know, touching the world and feeling like sometimes you're touching the world like a sound. So this for me was very poetic, and a lot of it is sort of, a lot of the text is kind of a metaphor for this kind of idea. And also for him in his book, it's a lot about intergenerational memory and trauma, and how then it's not just about touch and sound, and it's about memory and the things that you leave behind, but how things live with you into the present, and you don't even know. So there's a kind of physiology also in people's movements, in their DNA, and in the sound that they make, because everybody's physiologically different, but it's not just us, it's how our parents lived, it's how our grandparents lived, it's all of these things that kind of pass down through you. Yeah. So that's kind of a lot of different, but kind of similar ideas wrapped up in one that I wanted to kind of bring into this collaboration.
Yeah. Amazing. And then obviously you said you've worked with Henrik before, but and also Megumi and Yuko, but how did you decide that this was the right team and these dance practices were the best to help you explore these ideas?
Well, first of all, they all live here in Berlin, mm-hmm. So this was a kind of great opportunity to work with some people that are local. Mm-hmm. Megumi just moved here, was it a year ago? A year ago. But we met each other in New York when she was still living there. And we've done one improvisation at a concert once and it was really great. And she's somebody that I really wanted to work with more. Since I moved here 9 years ago, I've worked with Yuko a few times, but in pieces that she's put together. And maybe one of them we did an improvisation, but it was a larger kind of group, and we didn't have a chance to rehearse or talk about stuff much, and it was much more spontaneous. So I thought that this would be a nice format, because we had 2 days to rehearse, or 3 days actually, to be able to explore something together and kind of grow into it a little bit more. I mean, it wasn't a super long process, but you know, I think long enough that we could kind of get into it a little bit more, rather than just diving in with an improvisation.
Yeah.
So.
Amazing. And then leading on from that, Yuko, I wanted to ask you a bit about your practice, because I read up on you and that you work with Buto a lot. And I was wondering if you could maybe explain for our audience about what Buto is and how you've used that art form to explore these ideas that Audrey's talked about.
I think Buto dancers, many different kind of Buto dancers approach different way, but something like it's very it was great that Audrey bring the
Aural haptics.
haptic. And then text is so beautiful, like poetic, and also very sensual, and also physical. And she explained about the throat, like a voice technique, and then really this is makes really I feel like a Buto approach. And then I think also like a very good to hear from musician, you know, like a approach coming from musician, like very vibration, and it's not about the fixed forms or like a concrete picture, more about vibrational inspiration. So it was for me very, very beautiful and inspired. Yeah.
Thank you so much. And you mentioned about not being so much about a fixed form there. Maybe Megumi, you could lead in here about telling me, because I know you've all worked a lot with improvisation, and tell me a bit about how much of the piece is improvised and how much is structured, and how you developed it so that it has a structure within improvisation, or how it develops.
So we've been working for this like 3 days, right? We had 3 days of rehearsal. So we came up with the structures. Like, so you brought up circle the image. So that was, we didn't have that the first day.
No,
We are
it
just
was actually because all the sound cables ended up by chance looking a little bit like a circle anyway.
So second day, like you came with this idea, like the circle, and then like I think I was saying like I need a kind of sense of time, because the first day was just like just doing it, just do it, and I need to see the time frame, like, you know. So then I think came up like 3 sections. So we had that kind of structure, the first section, and it's like beginning and middle and end. But inside, then we had a little bit of, like, we had quite a bit of structures. But then in that, it's all improvisation. Yeah.
Amazing. And having this improvisation all together, I presume that you have to create quite a tight intuition or bond between all of the performers. Could you maybe talk a bit about how that develops and how you sense each other? Do you have like a relationship that's formed? I don't know who would like to maybe take that question.
I think for me, it's with music, and also in this situation, it's something like zooming from kind of an internal focus to an external focus, and to sometimes I look around, not so much, but to see where people are and what they're doing, but most of the time it's kind of like parallel, just feeling someone doing something in parallel with what I'm doing, and it's not necessarily like reacting directly to things, it's more like the overall form. And I think the 2 days of rehearsal we had were more about learning each other's language somehow. And then also we were discussing the text Audrey wrote and kind of internalizing it. And I felt like coming here is more like leaving all that behind. And then this idea of memory, kind of in like short-term memory, then remembering everything we talked about, but not being too controlled by it either. Because we were, like when me and Audrey play our duo, Beam Splitter, we usually say, this concert is going to be half an hour or 50 minutes or 20 minutes, and that's usually all we decide. But this time we had like 3 sections, and most of the time, like Megumi said, at least the beginning and end was decided, and sometimes something in the middle. So I think it was a process to, get away from looking at the time or like preparing for the next thing, but being able to improvise within that framework is a different practice than. So I think that only happened when we came here.
And it's also like it happened by accident, like this is good, and like let's do this. It's like it was a catchball situation that comes this way, and it's like,
So it's quite like an intuitive, natural process that developed organically. Yeah. Mentioning natural, but in sort of a different sense, from watching you doing some of the filming, I got very much a sense of the references to like natural and the human sounds, sort of obviously you making through your voice or through the trombone and breath, and obviously the human bodies, and then there's also references to it in the beautiful projection you have on the floor with the flower, the water lilies, I think they are, but then also you have these very strong and powerful electronic sounds coming from you, Henrik, which sometimes I found difficult to pull apart the differences between which sounds you were making and which were the electronic. I was wondering if this is sort of an idea that you were interested in playing with, this sort of tension between organic and natural sounds and bodies and the more electronic influences that are coming in as well.
Do you want to say something?
Yeah, I mean, in our duo that we have toured with quite a bit, we started out with just voice and trombone with amplification, and then after a while we started both using electronics to kind of extend our material and our possibilities. But the interesting thing is that my choice of electronics is quite strict. It's like I have maybe 5 things that I start with and then I tweak it from there. And it sounds, that wasn't intentional, but it sounds kind of similar to my trombone material. And Audrey has her electronics, which is more like a random generator with its own personality. That's like,
which I didn't use. I mean, I actually brought it, but then I decided, okay, it's already too much material, it's too much information. So, yeah.
And that's, it's kind of what we're drawn to. But I think I am looking for like a warmth in all of it, and like a kind of very strong core of energy, but then also, like a natural feeling or,
I think it's
sound.
like with the electronics. I mean, I use like kind of analog electronics, and I'm using it and sort of manipulating it, but really I don't know how it works, and I don't really know what I'm doing. But I think I'm just trying to overlay some kind of humanity over it. I think, you know what I mean? Like this stuff, I don't know how it works, and it's just coming, and it needs to be plugged in, and then I feel like I'm just trying to make it more human somehow by just kind of overlaying a lot of, I mean, I know I make a lot of sounds that do sound like electronics, but they're not. I mean, there's a lot of sounds in nature that sound even electronic, from different kinds of animals and frogs. And I'm, for me at least, interested in how the apparatus is flexible, the flexibility of the apparatus, and how far I can push that. And I think we all do that, in our discipline and in our practice. And I mean, they have such a different background with their history of movement, with Butoh and ballet and trombone, voice.
So.
That was actually something I was really interested in as well, because I read that you were classically trained Megumi in ballet, and I was wondering how this kind of process differs a lot for you, especially in terms of the relationship with music, differs from when you work in a ballet setting to in a more experimental setting like this.
Yeah, it was a long way. No, I don't know, I'm 45 years old. Yes, and I studied ballet when I was 2 years old. So then I had my professional career, and then halfway through, I became more contemporary and modern dancer. So yeah, ballet is all thinking about forms, start with the form, the lines. And so when I became more like a contemporary modern dancer, I just want to forget about that. And then I became I want to go back to my roots again. So I was actually thinking more, and also it's coming from you. You want to do it more technique. I should show it more technical way, So I was thinking more little bit more. I was thinking more my ballet background and using ballet to do this improvisation. Yeah. It's I'm going.
So figuring out how both can kind of come together to work in that.
Yeah.
I guess we were interested in seeing your material, the part of it that is kind of impossible for sure for me, but for most people. And in a way, that's what we're all. Yeah, and what you do and what we're kind of drawing out some level of impossibility in very different ways, but it has a similar core and a curiosity of, but then with very different maybe the three parts wouldn't have come to be because you said you feel more free with some boundaries, and that was okay, then we made a very quick decision to have some boundaries.
Yeah.
And I think for us that's been really interesting as well.
Actually, and coming from such different backgrounds and influencing each other in that way, do you think there's certain things that you've learnt that you might take forward from each other that you might take forward into future collaborations with other people?
I hope we do it again in front of a live audience.
I don't want to split you up too soon.
I think that if we kind of have just started, actually, in a way that this film, this video that's going to come out of this is a kind of nugget, a kind of capturing of the beginning of something, which is super. I'm super excited about how quickly we've been able to develop all the material, and it's been really a huge pleasure to be able to witness also visually what they're doing and be able to interact, and also for them to interact with us. We also talked about this as we were developing it. Immediately they were kind of drawn together. They're also, because they're Japanese, and the language and this idea of the Buto and the ballet relationship, and I said, but don't forget about us, in this space. So I really wanted it to kind of, this physicality, this idea, of the residue. It needs to be formed between the relationships between all of us. So, and that started coming more and more, especially today.
Also interesting because of now the corona. Because of corona, we have to have some kind of boundary to make, but we make some limitation of the space, and there's a very interesting, tension in a way, want to go but have to avoid, but still connected. And I think this was very interesting, strange balance each other.
Yeah, also the imaginary border of the circle. It's sort of, and the imagery of curiously enough, the imagery from the video is just taken. Henrik took it. We were walking in a cemetery, actually. So it was all the images are from these water wells that are there that you can water all the plants on your graves, which also kind of, for me, every time I saw the imagery, it was bringing me back to this sort of very peaceful. Every cemetery for me, I love them because they're really peaceful. They're like an oasis. This one is in the middle of the city, so that's why you could hear a lot of cars and stuff around. But then there it was sort of peaceful, and it's a place where you remember a lot of things. So it's also about memory.
And it comes back to what you were saying about
and then there was
memories.
like the water dropping, and then the ripple effect, and so this thing about echo and memory, and so
it's really beautiful.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned then obviously you hope to do it live, so the experience that the audience are getting of the film is kind of different from what you originally were thinking, how you were originally thinking you were going to perform. How's the process been of translating the performance into a film, and how do you think the experience will differ greatly for the audience?
I'm not sure.
I think because of the filming, we had to make more decisions quicker.
That's true.
And also like trying to imagine what, like, the projection has a certain light, but at the same time the dancers, or all of us, need to be seen from the camera without the picture becoming too grainy. So there's this like technical balancing.
Many more technical. things.
And also like rendering the video was finished this morning, like after 12 hours. So it's a very different.
Well, actually, we didn't finish. Now we have to check the video and put together.
That's
Actually,
there's
another
some more
layer
composition.
I think very interesting.
But then hanging the projector up here. And we've had a super great team here
Really great team.
that have just said yes to everything and no grunting at all, which is
they are so good.
very nice.
In Berlin, people are working super hard.
I feel quite privileged to have seen you filming it live as well, because I think one thing that struck me as well is it's quite an overwhelming experience, the piece. It's got so much like texture, with the sounds very, very loud, and then you have the movement, and then the visuals as well. It's quite a sensory experience being here live, which I guess comes back to what you were saying in the beginning about working with the senses and how they all come together as one. Well, thank you so much for all of your wonderful insights, and thank you everyone for joining us. If you'd like to find out more about Soundance Festival, you can head over to the website, which is www.soundance-festival.de, I believe, and you can find everything, including the full festival program there. But thank you very much.
Thank you.